me? So, as I was saying, uh, labor that went there in the north of Sri Lanka were Tamils from Chennai, and that is from the Madras province, as it was known as then. Sinhalese have also basically, if you look at the history, they have they have very going seagoing people from eastern Bihar and Konark and all those places where they were doing trade all over the world. Many of them went to the southern part of the island and they occupied the southern part of the island. So the extraction of population of Lanka is southern Lanka is full of majority Sinhalese who are Buddhist from Bihar provinces. They are Santhal type of people. And in the north, you've got the Tamilians. Now there was a clash of interest here when Lanka got its independence, and Ceylon got its independence and called itself Sri Lanka. The government was Sinhalese and they kept the Tamils out of it. The Tamils were treated as second class citizens. With the result, many of the Tamils started infiltrating back into India. So, right from the days of the British, there was this problem of large numbers of Tamils who couldn't get jobs and government jobs and things like that, or get a good business going. They'd get into a boat and land up in Tamil Nadu and settle down there. With the result, there were problems of foreign settlement in Tamil Nadu. This problem was going on from the early 1900s, right? So this is the background to it. Now, after the independence of Sri Lanka, they became a little more harsh, the Sinhalese government, with the Tamils. They were not allowed government service and they were not allowed to, their provinces were controlled by Sinhalese bosses, you see. They have a unitary system of government like the British government in England, where you don't have separate chief ministers and things of various areas, but the area is very small. So you have members of parliament who are in charge of constituencies and they're all represented in the parliament. That's the same thing with Sri Lanka. So the representations of Tamil areas in North Tamil, North Sri Lanka and Eastern Sri Lanka, which had the majority of Tamils, both Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists, they were not allowed to be treated as a normal citizen of the country. They were second-class citizens. So they were agitating about this. And now, because of this agitation, I think India also probably assisted from politically, that means from your dirty tricks department of the politics, to say that you guys fight back. So certain weapons and equipment, etc., were sent off to the people and they created terrorist gangs, of which Prabhakaran being the best leader, he made a very strong LTTE set of Tamil Tigers gang, men and women, who were very good guerrilla fighters. And since there was a lot of pressure going on at that time, I am now talking of 1987, on these people, the Sri Lankan armies had forced them to evacuate certain areas in East Sri Lanka and North Sri Lanka and concentrate in a peninsula called the Talai Manar. Now, if you look at the map, Talai Manar is a peninsula extreme north of Sri Lanka, which is extending toward the Indian shore. And since it's a peninsula, it is a narrow entry point from the northern Sri Lankan heartland. And all the Tamils went rushing over there. And so the Sri Lankan army blocked the entrances, both by sea as well as by land, so that they'd be stopped out. They couldn't get grain and couldn't get food. So he appealed to Rajiv Gandhi to do all that. So how this thing started was that Rajiv Gandhi decided, as a humanitarian effort to give food to those who have been deprived of food, he sent a few large Indian Air Force aircraft to drop food packets and food parcels in this Tulai Manar area. And since Sri Lanka had an Air Force, a small Air Force, with some fighters, about a squadron worth of fighters, this was escorted by a squadron of fighter aircraft so that they could drop these things there. Now, this became an international incident. Mr. Jayawardena was the president of Sri Lanka, and he complained to Indian government, Rajiv Gandhi, and the United Nations to say that our airspace has been invaded by India to give food packets, etc., to these Tamils which are in the Talaimanar Peninsula. Now, at that time, the government made a decision. They asked General Sundari, who was the chief, that if we send the military there to sort of secure the Tamil tigers and the Tamil population from the Sri Lankan, to sort of make a line where those chaps can survive. It's a sort of a peacekeeping mission to the extent that we want to save this community from the depredations of the Sri Lankan army. And General Sundar said, it will take a couple of weeks, we'll do that. Now, we all army commanders were not consulted on this. Nevertheless, many of us, including myself, did tell the chief that don't think something like this can be done in 2 weeks. It'll take years because there's an insurgency going on there. There is a terrorism going on there. And even in India, if you take Nagaland, Mizoram, and Manipur, it started at independence, it's still going on. So don't think this can be done. He said, no, the Indian army is very strong, we'll handle it and all that sort of thing. So he, with Air Chief Marshal Lafontaine, who was and then the chief of the Air Force, decided to support Rajiv Gandhi's requirement militarily. And they were ready to do this. So now we sent some military troops into Sri Lanka. Now, I was asked to provide a division. Now, division comprises the Major General's command with 3 or 4 brigades. And the total number of troops is not less than 15,000 or 18,000. 15,000 would be the correct answer. They said immediately, I got a call from the military operations to say, within 3 days, please send a whole division from Eastern Command to Sri Lanka to join the IPKF, the Indian Peacekeeping Force. So I said, look, I'm dealing with terrorists in Nagaland and I finished with Mizoram, but there's Manipur. Assam has got a lot of terrorism going on. And I have to train this division to function in the very forested area of North Sikkim, of North Sri Lanka. I need at least 2-3 weeks of training before I send this, get them together. And the military operations said, no, there's no such deal. You just land up there for within 3 days, and I can assure you within a month they'll be back. I said, you don't know what you're talking about. It's not going to happen like that. So I insisted I will not send it till I have trained this division. So I selected a division. 56th Mountain Division was the one that I had served with when I was commanding a brigade in Mizoram. This 56th Mountain Division was in Kachar district of Assam, southern Assam, just north of Mizoram. And now that Mizoram had settled down, Nagaland was still, we had a division, I couldn't spare any troops from there. And we couldn't spare troops from near Bhutan because we keep troops near Bhutan in case they have a problem with the Chinese. So I said, I'll give you 56th Mountain Division, but first I'll train them. So I trained them for 3 weeks. I took them to Sikkim. And because I knew that area so well, and I laid on exercises from them, and they did very well. In jungle warfare and mountainous jungle warfare. We trained them thoroughly. So then I dispatched this division to Sri Lanka. Plus they asked me as Eastern Army commander to send our river boats. Now, Eastern Army, I think I told you about this when I was talking about the 1971 war. Eastern Army has a navy fleet of its own comprising river boats. This was the Hooghly River. But they can go right up to Guwahati and all that. And they are the large boats run by local people who have been recruited from the fishermen group of Calcutta. They are top-class seamen. See? Because they have motorized fishing vessels, etc. They know every current in the Hooghly, and they know every current in the north part of the delta of the Brahmaputra and the Hooghly, because they go into the North Bay of Bengal to do their fishing. They know every current, every sandbank, everything. They're very good sailors. So what happens is, right from 1971 war, before that, Army had recruited these fishermen. They became JSOs and officers and, havaldars and all that sort of thing. And they were manning these boats. And they had fishing experience. They had their own fishing boats, etc. So this is the Navy. We had about 5 or 6 of these boats. Now these boats were very large and they could carry military equipment. In 71 war, they used to carry 5 or 6 tanks or B vehicles or whatever they're dozers, tractors, you name it, to assist in the 1971 war by going onto the north portion of the Bay of Bengal and getting into various deltas of the Brahmaputra River to supply our troops as they were going through the very riverine terrain of East Pakistan at that time. So they asked me to send this to Trincomalee, which is a very good harbor on the eastern part of Sri Lanka, to assist in supplies to our divisions that are functioning in Trincomalee and Batticaloa, which is further south, because there's a huge sea portion there. And to supply our troops by sea was easier than by land, because much of the land was under contest between the terrorists and between the Sri Lankan army. So when the Indian army went there to sort of be a buffer between these two, the supplying of some of our divisions was eased by seaborne supplies. So they wanted five of these boats. Now the question here is these boats don't have the engine maintenance and power to go these long distances, because to go down the whole coast of India to Sri Lanka, to Trincomalee, to eastern shore. Trincomalee is one of the best harbors of the Indian Ocean, by the way, for your information. It's on the eastern side, and it was selected even by the British and the Americans when they came in for the World War II as a very good harbor to launch attacks against Japan. So we sent these boats with the proviso that spare engines and things like that would be provided at Madras or somewhere else to keep them going, otherwise they'll be still on the sea. We managed to send these boats over there, and they did a very good job of work there. Just goes to show that how river boats, people who are very good fishermen, can produce a little private navy of its own for load carrying duties. Now, one of these parties in Calcutta, I think it was the Hurricane Roy party, if I recollect, a lot of people. It was the tea party, and his excellent tea was being drunk by everybody, plus cakes and things like that. A lot of discussions about Indian politics and what's going to happen to the Rajiv Gandhi government and so on in the next election. And while I was there with Snoopy, this gentleman called Ajit, who used to be my friend in Mizoram, he was an intelligence officer. He was there, and he sort of met me by chance. He said, "Oh, hello, General, how are you?" And I said, "How are you?" Then we got to chatting. What is he doing and what am I doing and all that? How am I enjoying my job? Then he asked me a few interesting questions. He said, "We are told that you are the senior most army commander and that you are therefore sweating to be the chief." In the days of the Congress government, let me explain to you, there was a lot of press outcry if the government did not select the senior most army commander to be the army chief, because the press was claiming that the Congress government would like to have an army chief who is more friendly with the Congress than with anybody else. So if you didn't follow the seniority level, then a lot of questions used to be raised. So by and large, they used to select the senior most man. It doesn't always happen, but by and large. Not that this thing matters at all, because loyalty of the army chief has to be to the government in power. There's no doubt about it. If tomorrow there's a communist government in power, you have to be loyal to the people. People of India select a central government, the chief has to be loyal to that. Nonetheless, there was always a fear among the politicians that if the army chief is not cooperating with the party, then things could go wrong. Anyway, so he asked me, he says, "I'm told you're the senior most and you're setting to be the army chief." I said, "I don't know. Actually, the selection is that of the cabinet and the prime minister, and they can select anyone they like. There's no big deal." So then he asked me that there's another officer called B.K. Nanda, Lieutenant General B.K. Nanda, who is slightly junior to me. And he is a relative of the famous General and later Field Marshal Karyaba. He's his nephew. A very good officer. And though I was commanding Eastern Army, he was commanding Northern. He'd also had a very good service, very experienced. They said that this talk that they might make him. I said, yes, he's a very top class officer. He'll make a very good army chief, there's no question. So he asked me, but he's junior to you. I said, so what? He said, if he becomes the army chief, would you obey his orders? I said, of course, because once he becomes the army chief, he's senior to me. There's no question. He's got the rank. So I said, but the thing is, I only obey legal orders. That's my problem. I don't take from anyone orders which I consider are illegal. Then I ask for a Supreme Court to intervene and see what they have to say on the subject. If they say it's legal, then I'll not otherwise. I've already done that in Eastern Army. That's the Sumarodong 2 incident that took place in Kamang Frontier Division of Arunachal. So he said, true enough, but if you are superseded, would you go to court to demand justice? I said, no, no. How can you go to court? It's a government decision. Some people may like to do that, but I don't believe in court cases. It's entirely up to the government to decide. They said, but then you would obey his orders. I said, of course. He said, would you resign your commission and go away in disgust like General Manesena did when he was vice chief and superseded by General Vedya later in life? When I was in the MO director, he resigned and went. So I said, no, I'm serving for my tenure as long as the government wants my service. And I'll serve up to my full tenure. And I'll certainly obey the orders of the army chief, no matter who he is, provided they're legal. And I accept the legality thereof. So he's asking his question. Then he said something. He said, but then you will appreciate that if you do become the army chief, there's only one person who can make you the army chief. I said, who's that? He said, that's the prime minister. So I said, so? So what? He said, then you have to, and the Hindi word, haath malana hoga. That means you have to keep your hands together. That means the prime minister says something, you got to do it. So I said, look, Ajit, it's not like that. Whether he's a prime minister or he's God, he gives me an order, it has to be, in my view, a legal order. Otherwise, I'll buck it. I'm not going to do it. I'm a difficult man. And if you are in the book of words and asking these questions because somebody has asked you to ask these questions, let it be known to the powers that be that I'm a difficult man. Don't select me, because if I find something is wrong, I'll buck it. I'll buck it harshly. Otherwise, if something is legal and correct, I do it with my full vim and vigor, and I want nothing more. I am quite happy to retire as the army commander. I don't want to do anything out of the ordinary. If I'm selected as the army chief, I'll do that job. If not selected, I'll go home and relax with my family and watch my children grow. So I told him. Now, this was about October or November of 1987. Now, General Sundarji had run two exercises. One was brass tacks, which I told you about when I was commanding the College of Combat, and I was the enemy commander. And the other he wanted to do was an exercise called checkerboard, which is the question of what happens if the Chinese attack. Now, I must give it to General Sundarji that he used to run very good exercises. The only trouble with brass tacks was that since it was with troops, it created a hassle with Pakistan because we almost went to war. And that was not the idea that the government wanted. In the case of checkerboard, he made sure that no troop movement was to be done. But in the eastern wing, that is Arunachal Pradesh and so on, we were to do a series of tactical exercises and discussions with our corps commanders and other commanders, that if things blew up in the northeast of India's borders, how would we manage it? So I was doing these discussions in my operations room in Eastern Army headquarters. And in the middle of this discussion, it was a 4-day discussion, and I was conducting it. I was the army commander, and I had all my three corps commanders there. In North Bengal, we had Bulbul Barar, who had also commanded a division when the Golden Temple attack took place much earlier in 1984. And he was now a lieutenant general, and he was doing very well. He's commanding the corps there. And I had the 4 Corps commander, another Corps commander there. This is 33 Corps, 4 Corps, and then the Nagaland and Mizoram Corps. All these 3 Corps commanders were there, and we were all discussing our various plans, and we had syndicates to decide what our answers to various problems, technical problems would be, which we were conducting. And my ADC came into the room and said, there is a call from Delhi for you. Outside the ops room, we had a telephone booth. So they're asking you. I said, tell them I'm busy in a conference, and whoever it is takes his name and number, and I'll ring him later. He said, no, sir, it's the cabinet secretary himself who's on the line, and he wants to speak. So then I called a halt here, and I went inside there. He spoke. He said, I'm Deshmukh. I'm the cabinet secretary. I said, no, Mr. Deshmukh, good morning to you. What do you want? He said, you're going to be the next chief. Now, this was almost 3 months before the date of Sundarji's retirement. Sundarji's retirement was on the 31st of May. This call came in February, more than 2.5 months, almost 3 months prior to Sundarji's retirement. I was a little surprised because normally the government does not announce the next chief. They are hardly announced a couple of weeks before the retirement of the previous chief as to who the next chief is going to be. But here I was getting 2.5 months, 3 months notice. So he said, General, you're going to be the next army chief. I wanted to inform you. So congratulations. I said, oh, thank you very much. I'm busy in a conference now. I want to go and carry on my operation discussion. He said, no, General, there is another point. We want you to come to Delhi straight away and be with us. I said, what for? He said, because we are not sure how to handle the present chief, that's General Sundarji. I said, why? He says, it appears to us that he's building more and more power to go to war with Pakistan or something. And government doesn't want that. I said, well, you didn't give him orders. What's the problem? You're the cabinet and you're the prime minister. You give the chief orders, it will be done. He said, no, he's somebody who doesn't take orders very easily. So we want you here to help us handle him. I said, just a minute. Where do I report and who's going to be my boss? He said, you will come to the cabinet secretariat and you'll serve with me. I said, I'm certainly not going to serve under you. I'm a military man, I'm not a diplomat, and I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm not going to come there just to take hukum for you and meanwhile twiddle my thumbs doing nothing for the next 2.5 or 3 months till the chief retires. If you sack the chief now, I shall come. But if you don't sack him, then I'll come when it's time to come. You know, General, the Prime Minister has requested that you should be here. I said, well, you tell the Prime Minister I'm not going to be here. He said, what happens if there's a problem? I said, there's no problem. I'm in Calcutta. I'm only 2 hours away by 1.5 to 2 hours away by flight. There's no problem. I can come anytime if there's an emergency. And I must inform you that Calcutta is no mean place. When the British were here, the whole of India was commanded by the commander-in-chief of India in Britain from Calcutta. His headquarters was in Calcutta. It is only later that they moved to Delhi when the government of the central government moved to Delhi. Otherwise, everything was run from Calcutta. So it's no big deal. We've got the communications, we've got the aircraft, we've got wireless, we've got phone. It's no big deal. So I said I can handle everything from here. They said, no, but General, you're in Calcutta. You don't know what's going on here in the West. I said, that's a wrong one. I know everything about what's going on everywhere, including in your office. So forget it. So I said, I'm not coming. He said, then when will you come? I said, well, if I'm going to be the next chief, there'll be 2 or 3 briefings by the MS branch and by the Adjutant General's branch and by the military operations to brief me on the latest situations on all these fronts. So I'll be coming to Delhi off and on, and I'll say hello to you, don't worry. So on that we parted. The moment I got back into the ops room, Bulbul Barar got up and started clapping. He says, you're going to be the next chief. So I said, he says, the moment cabinet secretary calls you, we know what the answer is. So I said, anyway, then another 2 or 3 months to go, so we don't know what happens. You know, anything can happen in 2 or 3 months. That was my first information that I was to be the next chief. Anyways, Ruby and I got ready to move there. I was very sorry to part from Calcutta because it's such a delightful place to be in. Not because of anything else, except to say that the people in top positions, whether they are corporate sector, government, or business, private business, they're very decent lot. and they love to get on with each other, and they take you at your worth. Even the newspaper people. Uh, we got on very famously with Avik Sarkar, for instance, who was controlling the Amrita Bazar Patrika and the Telegraph and so on. M.J. Akbar was the editor of the Telegraph, but his boss was Avik Sarkar. And you know what happened with Avik Sarkar? There was a party by a diplomat to which I and Srupi were invited. And I found this gentleman leaning down in a reclining position on a sofa and holding court with about 20 people around him to tell them how useless the government of India is for having, and the Indian army is for having gone into Sri Lanka, because Mujib was the chief and they'd gone into Sri Lanka. He said, there's no future here, and India's got no business to go to foreign countries, etc., like that. We are a self-respecting nation. We shouldn't cross our borders aggressively into somebody else's borders. That's what we claim. And so I was hearing some of this. So I came forward and I said, look, who the hell are you? So he was rather surprised. And then somebody introduced me. This is Avik Sarkar, the chap who's controlling the two papers. I said, look, Avik, you may be whoever you are, but government of India, central government has been elected by you. He said, no, General, I never voted for them. I said, because you never voted for them does not mean that the people of India didn't vote for them. Country has voted the Congress government into power, and Rajiv Gandhi is the prime minister. He's far superior than any of you. And when he makes a decision, you have to abide by that because he's the central government. You can't make your own views on something. You're sitting here as a newspaper man pontificating as to what could be done or should not be done. You're not in a responsible position. You're not authorized to handle the Indian army or the country or anyone else. You're just talking. So shut your mouth, because I'm not accepting anything. The Indian army doesn't go anywhere on its own. The Indian army only goes where it is ordered to go, provided those orders are legal. And if the country decides to go into Sri Lanka to assist the Tamil population, it is a legal order. It has to be obeyed. That's it. What happens thereafter, we wait and see. Your views are no concern to anyone. Well, told about. So about 2 weeks later, I got an invitation to dinner to Veek Sarkar's house. And I put my intelligence on it to say, what sort of a man is this? Is he a communist? Is he antagonistic to the country? Or should I go? Should I not? Because, you know, when you're an army commander, you have to think 10 times whether you go to somebody's place or not. So they've checked up. They said, no, he's a very fine gentleman. He's one of the very, very superior families of Bengal. And you can certainly go and have dinner with him. So I accepted the dance rupee. I went there, and they were very nice. There were about 12 guests. And I think his wife was a very charming person, and she laid on a very good dinner. And very happy to go there, and very nice to meet all those people that we met there. When I was going away, I complimented the lady, and then I turned to Avik. I said, Avik, I'm sorry for that little incident that took place a few weeks ago when I thought you were a bit of a shit. But you married such a marvelous woman, and she must have seen something in you which I haven't seen. I must say that you're a very good household, and a great pleasure that we were here. So we parted as good friends. Newspapers are very important, but sometimes they make statements of which they have got no responsibility to make. Why? For instance, if you see some of the things that are being reported in the foreign press about India, our nastiness with certain communities, our nastiness with the minorities, our nastiness, you know, United Nations, everybody saying this is because of the opposition of the government, that's Congress Party and others in the Communist Party, who are sending all this information abroad. Dissension. So yes, fine, dissension can be in the country, but you can't downgrade your country in foreign lands, which is not correct. Of course, the present government is powerful enough, no matter what anybody says. We don't know whether they win the next election or not. That we wait and see. But the fact is that if he's got such a majority in parliament, it's because the people of India have voted for it. So this sort of undercutting, if you're against the minorities, you're killing all the Muslims, you're doing this, you're doing that, it is not really so. If you examine the question of what's happening in certain areas, there's a lot of provocation going on by certain minorities. The farmers, the Muslim groups, and they're not all of them. Many Muslims I know are very good Indian citizens. They're as good as you and me, and they are totally Indian. They are not antagonistic. But there are few planted by perhaps Pakistan or whoever it is, who keep shouting from the housetops, oh, this is bad and this, you're doing this to us. Many of the riots that took place in Delhi, for instance, when Trump was visiting Delhi, have been created and caused by the Muslim group. Now, why don't we see that? But the newspapers are such that they turn and twist the story in such a way that their political views are expressed antagonistic to whatever the government is doing in order perhaps to get the government out of office and get somebody of their own in office. Since the Congress had ruled, I'm just giving my views, maybe data, I may not be right, but these are my views. Congress has ruled this country for over 70 years, not because of the Congress government itself, but various governments between 1990 and 2000 that came in here were ex-Congress who created small little parties and made coalition governments, like Deva Gowda and Chandrasekhar and others. They're not very competent, but they did whatever had to be done. Why this country is running so well is not because of what the government is doing or not doing, it's because what the citizens of this country are. Our economy is going on because of the very sharp minds of our corporate sector. And newspapers are doing well because of the very good handling of news by reporters and journalists, etc. Nobody's waiting for the government to tell us what to do. We are doing our own. It's a free country. So what is happening is that certain efforts are being made to create dissension inside this country, mostly by terrorist type of groups, whether they be Muslims or whether they be the Khalistanis or whoever. And in South India also, there are some problems of this nature. So I think newspapers can write what they like. Previously, there used to be editors who could write their own editorials and their own style. But now most newspapers are controlled by big money corporates, whether it's from abroad, or whether it's from the Christian church, or whether it's from the communists. And therefore, the editorials have to follow the style that has been laid down. If you recollect, when the chief editor of the New York Times was retiring, we saw this on YouTube, his speech. He is the chief editor, he was retiring. And he had all the reporters who gave him a party and asked him to say a few words. And he got up and said, he says, you know, all you reporters, and I know that whatever we report is absolute, utter lies. It is based on what we are ordered to write. And if we don't write that, we'll be out on the street in 1 second. So if you want your job and you want your sale, you've got to swallow the truth and write what the guy wants you to write. I don't know if you agree with that, but he made that speech. So I wanted to say a few words about this. Now, as I was about to leave Calcutta, a little incident took place, which I'd like to describe. You see, in Bodoland, there was some problem going on. And this problem in Bodoland was a little agitation going on about they wanted Bodoland, a free Bodoland in Assam. Assam has already been cut up into so many other little states, now they want this little bit also. Who are these Bodos? Many of us say that, yeah, some of them are from local area of that area. Some are joined by East Pakistan Muslims who infiltrated into this country and joined this group. So there is an agitation going there for a separate Bodoland. And what happened was that we had a military train going from Calcutta to Guwahati and to the borders of Bhutan, carrying ammunition. There were about 30 or 40 sea wagons, all full of ammunition. This ammunition quite because we got two corps of infantry in the east. You see, one at Tezpur and one at Dimapur for the Nagaland Mizoram sector, and Tezpur is the Arunachal sector. And we also gave ammunition to Bhutan because of friendly relations. So this ammunition was going there. And we had a guard of 6 soldiers here, 3 in the engine and 3 in the guard thing, but the rest are all sea wagons. So when they now, as I told you, this is the chicken neck. There's very little distance between the border of Bengal on the East Bengal, that is Bangladesh, and the Nepalese border. There's about 20 or 30 kilometers wide strip through which road and rail communications pass before the trains come to Jalpaiguri and North Bengal railway station, from which they continue to Guwahati. So now this train was ambushed in the way that a couple of logs of wood were placed across the line, so the engine came to a halt. And there were these Bodos on both sides who opened fire. And our 3 soldiers in the engine were shot dead. And the other 3 soldiers at the back of the train, they realized that they were totally outnumbered by the number of rifles and things shooting at them. So they disappeared from the scene. So we came to know that this train has been halted and 3 soldiers are dead. So I was about to leave Calcutta and I was about to go to Delhi to take over as the army chief. I left on 31st of May. No, 30th of May. I reached in Delhi 30th of May. Sundarji was last day in office 31st. I said, I'll say goodbye to you. I won't, the chiefs don't take over a handover. I don't know what they do now, but in my time, there was no handing over, taking over. Who went and next man took over because he got different rules how to handle things. So he knows how to handle it. He doesn't have to get any briefing from the previous chief. So I landed up on the 30th and General Sundarji asked me, would you like to come to the office and get a briefing? I said, no. You are going to on 31st by plane. I'll come and see you off at the airport and see your wife off at the airport. So Srupi and I went to the airport to see them off. But as I was leaving, this incident took place one day earlier. That's on, I reached at 30th, maybe the 29th of May or so. This incident took place. So as I became chief, I straight away ordered, now Eastern Army had been taken over by a man called R.K. Vora. He is Guggi Vora. Lieutenant General Guggi Vora was the corps commander. He was posted on staff somewhere. And then he took over Eastern Army. And he had been my second in command when I was commanding 66 Armored Regiment. He originally belonged to the Sindh Horse. Then he came to 66 Armored Regiment as my second in command. And then from there, he picked up his rank as Lieutenant Colonel and took over Hodson's Horse in the 71 war, where he won in Mahavir Chakra. He's a fine officer and he's a very good friend of mine. And he rang me up and told me that I'm the senior most person to take over the command, but I don't know if the government will give it or not. I checked up with the Defense Ministry. I said, he's a good man. They said, we were thinking of posting him somewhere else. I said, no, give him Eastern Army. So they gave him Eastern Army, right? And he became the GOCNC Eastern Command. So I rang him up. I said, Guggi, there's a problem in the Northeast where the train was halted. I want that examined because I just taken over the army chief, but I said I will deal with it personally because there's a lot of politics involved here, I can see. The lesson here is that you may be a military commander, but you have to keep your eyes and ears open as to what the politics is, because politics is a dirty game sometimes, underhand dirty game. And unless you understand that, you do not understand why you're being given certain orders. So I said, I want you to check out why the Bodos shot at this train and killed 3 of our soldiers. So I said, I'll deal with Bulbul Barar, who's the corps commander there. I said, deal with them directly, and I want your permission to deal with him directly because there's a political side to this. I don't want you involved. He said, okay, sir, you go ahead and do what's right. So I rang up Bulbul. I said, look, I've got permission of your army commander to talk to you directly. He sent Colonel so-and-so and Brigadier so-and-so to the Bodo chief.